Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this January 22nd, 2018 day. My name is Nick Pitts, and I am the host of Point of View this morning, and we are so excited you decided to join us today. We've got a packed show for you. We're going to be talking about everything from the government shutdown to the Taliban attack that happened over the weekend, as well as congressmen. And we're continuing to find out more about this congressional secret fund to fund some of these harassment claims that are coming out against congressmen and their staffers. And then we'll also be talking about the Facebook, the new algorithm that you will be seeing less information in your news feed, but also will it be more biased information? We'll be talking about all of that during the first hour. And then in the second hour, we're going to have two special guests in the studio this morning. We'll be talking with about the Council for Life and their upcoming luncheon. And we'll be welcoming Cynthia Wenz as well as Claire Culwell. That will be over the phone. And so it's going to be a packed show for you all today. And so we hope you're going to be able to join us as well, because obviously we're taking your phone calls as well as taking some of your comments online. So you can jump online to facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and you can share your comments or your questions, and we'll get to that during the show, as well as you can hop on over and you can use the telephone and call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And for millennial listeners out there, that's that thing that you text on. You can actually use it to actually call someone on there. And so you can call in again at 800-351-1212. And so there was just a lot of news that happened over the weekend, but not a lot of work that happened within our government. So it got shut down, much like the Vikings got shut down yesterday. And so what happened over the weekend is our government has shut down due to an inability for Congress to be able to come together on a funding bill, kind of a continuing resolution to be able to fund the government. And so the Senate, though, according to CNN, is scheduled to have a key vote on Monday, noon Eastern time, on a bill to reopen the government and fund it for 3 weeks, though it's unclear if this plan will win over enough Democrats to pass. If you remember the current congressional makeup, the Republicans boast of 51, and they're going to need 60 votes to be able to pass this. The vote's going to come several hours after the workday has already begun, or rather not begun, for hundreds of thousands of furloughed federal employees that was supposed to have begun today, but now they're making their way into an unofficial 3-day weekend because of Congress's inability to come together and fund our government. Many of the shutdowns full effects were less visible during the weekend, obviously, because individuals were at home resting and taking advantage of the weekend. But what we continued to see, even happening over the weekend, is there was an inability just to be able to come to an agreement, because it really does. There's a variety of issues that are at the very core of this, but one of the central issues is that of immigration. Specifically, Republicans traditionally have wanted, and because of President Trump's really willingness and really much desire to build a big, quote, beautiful wall on one side, really does want funding for that wall. But then on the other side, you have Democrats that have really decided to really stand up and take a pretty strong stand for the Dreamers, those 800,000 individuals that are a part of the Deferred Action Childhood Act. And so Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, and they've decided to really take a stand on that. Senate Majority Leader John Cornyn of Texas said that he thought Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer agreed to push back the vote to give his caucus a chance to chew on the GOP proposal, which is trying to break this particular impasse that we have. Well, what do we know about this? Well, President Trump still hopes to pass an infrastructure package later this year, but this shutdown makes that less likely to happen. Conservatives say they'll only support spending if environmental and labor regulations are rolled back, which will make it impossible for a few Democrats to get on board. What we're continuing to see is there is just a great tension, because not only is this going to affect our current position right now, but also what it looks like moving forward past this particular point later on in the year. Because our government hopefully is going to be able to do something more than just be able to fund the government, but really cast a vision and to be able to cast priorities as we move forward down the year. And some of those included everything from what we try to do with healthcare this past year to infrastructure planning and et cetera, and especially immigration, which appears to be one of those issues that Democrats are really going to get tied to at this particular compromise point. You see, Democrats are going to the mat on this spending fight because they know it's very unlikely that House Republicans would ever pass a standalone bill to protect the Dreamers, these undocumented immigrants who were brought here as children. According to the Washington Post, they're frustrated that they were cut out of negotiations to overhaul the tax code, which passed last month on a party line vote. President Trump called on Senate Republicans on Sunday to go nuclear, changing the rules so they can pass any legislation with a simple majority of 50 votes. Plus, Vice President Mike Pence's tie-breaking vote. Hardliners like Ted Cruz, who is the senator out of Texas, who is also kind of what some consider the architect of the 2013 shutdown, and has endorsed this idea. And other individuals like Senator McConnell, Leader McConnell out of Kentucky, who spent decades in the minority, continue to resist this push because they understand that over the long term, turning the Senate into a majoritarian body like the House would benefit liberals, according to the Washington Post, much more than conservatives. Of course, the one big exception to this is judges. Again, Leader McConnell changed the chamber's rules last year to stop a filibuster of now jurist Neil Gorsuch's nomination to the Supreme Court. So how are the American people taking this? Well, what's been fascinating from a political standpoint is that you have individuals that have really tried to blame the Democrats or blame the Republicans. Is it the Democrats' fault because they're really being intransigent and not willing to work with Republicans on this? Or is it Republicans' fault? After all, they control the White House, they control the Senate, they control the Congress, and they control the vast majority of state houses. Is this not their problem since the American people have given them leadership? Well, according to a new Politico Morning Consult poll, what we see conducted over Thursday and Friday found that more voters would blame Republicans in Congress for the government shutdown, 41%, than would blame Democrats, 36%. Democrats and Republicans by wide margins held the other side responsible, but more independents say that they would blame Republicans than Democrats at a 34 to 27% level. Well, who do you blame? What do you think is the issue right here? Who do you think is to fault? Is it Republicans because they're assuming leadership from top down, all the way from the top of the federal government, even down to the state house level? Or is this more of a Democrat issue? And the blame resides with Democrats and their inability to be able to work with Republicans, and them really just kind of standing tall and not really willing to negotiate or compromise. We'd love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. Or you can hop over to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And we'll be taking some of your comments and questions that you leave online, and we'll be sharing them here as well. One of the fascinating things that we pointed out in one of the Facebook videos right before we went to the show is it's actually costing the government more money in the shutdown to stay shut down than it is when they were just operating normally at kind of an optimal level, you could say. But one of the unfortunate things that's happening, though, and one of the things that we just need to continue to press is this idea that many individuals that are paid by the government are not getting paid right now. There's going to be a delay in their paycheck. Most significantly, this is going to affect soldiers. Active duty soldiers right now will not be paid during this government shutdown, but will be paid after the shutdown ends. Senator Claire McCaskill tried to position a bill to be able to move this forward so that soldiers could be paid during the shutdown. But what happened is the bill was silenced and put off to the side. We'd love to hear from you. Do you have a comment, question, or call? Be sure to call in or check out the Facebook page and leave a message, and we'll get to that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Today is the anniversary of Roe v. Wade. When the Supreme Court removed most state restrictions on abortion back in 1973, who could have predicted the world we live in today? When the ruling came down, few understood the long-term implications. I remember speaking on the issue in college classrooms a few years later and wondering when the Supreme Court would reverse its decision. By the 1980s, it seemed like only a matter of time that abortion would once again be restricted in America. That did not happen. A whole generation of young people have grown up never having known a time when abortions were illegal. They may have seen some protests and may have heard some debate about the subject, but that perhaps is the sum total of their experience. Abortion has left a scar on the soul of this nation, just like the scar slavery left on America's soul in previous centuries. Unfortunately, many Americans cannot see the scar that abortion has left on this country. I see the evidence of these scars when I take phone calls from women who are exploited by abortion. I see evidence of these scars when I hear the cavalier comments of young people about human life. I see those scars when I hear people debate related issues like stem cell research and physician-assisted suicide. But I also see the healing when I see the good work of pregnancy resource centers. I understand from people working in this area that there are 3 times as many pregnancy resource centers in this country as there are abortion clinics. In many ways, the pro-life movement is winning the war of ideas. And I'm encouraged that so many young people, our future leaders, are pro-life and understand the importance of being pro-life. So there are some encouraging signs even as we see the scars left by abortion. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View on this January 22nd, 2018 day. The government is shut down, but we are not. And so we are so excited that you decided to join us this morning. We've been talking about the government shutdown that happened over the weekend, and it's how congressmen and lawmakers have been trying to huddle to figure out a way to move forward on this. One of the central issues and kind of the impasse that they find themselves on is this idea of immigration. On the left side, you have the Democrats that are willing to kind of take a stand for what's called the Dreamers, those 800,000 individuals that came here on no volition of their own, but were brought over here. The Democrats really wanting them to be able to gain legal status. The sense that Republicans are wanting to be able to also work towards that end, but don't want that to be a central part of this particular conversation at this point in the conversation right now. But what Democrats have largely said is that they don't believe that that will actually happen. Looking back, if Winston Churchill said that the further you look back into the past, the more clearly you can see into the future. And if you look back into the recent past of what's happened relative to Congress, there's been an inability to actually get legislation passed. And so you see hesitancy within the Democratic side of actually getting a bill passed relative to the Dreamers and their legal status. And so they've balked, and they said, this is going to be the point that we're willing to fight. We're not moving forward until we deal with these Dreamers at this budget point that we're at right now. And then on the Republican side, Republicans very much, led by President Trump, very much want a wall, according to him, a big, beautiful wall. One of the things that's really happening right now is that Democrats are largely hesitant towards the funding of that wall. The funding of that wall, there's around 1,700 miles that's along the southern border, and so it's a pretty significant chunk of money. And there's quite hesitancy relative to Democrats to be able to give funds towards this wall, as some would say it's not really an efficient use of funds or being a good steward of those funds. But what creates irony of ironies is the sense that there is what's been said on Twitter, there is a tweet for everything. Donald Trump really our president has really put himself out there over the past years when he was on Twitter and he was outside the presidency. And if you remember, if you go back to 2013, Ted Cruz, the senator out of Texas, was really the architect, really the leader that led towards the government shutdown during that time. But one of the claims that came out, and one of the things that's very interesting, is that President Trump during that time tweeted that he criticized President Barack Obama during the 2013 government shutdown for, quote, failing to lead. He can't get everyone in the room and can't make a deal. Well, in a twist of fate, now we find ourselves in a situation where on President Trump's first anniversary in office, where he was scheduled to be in Mar-a-Lago down in Florida to be able to host a reception as well as a fundraiser, he was unable to be able to go because of a government shutdown. And so he found himself here in Washington, where individuals are doing their best to be able to work and try to find a solution. And a budget vote will come today at noon our time. And it's the best hope for a breakthrough appeared to reside with a group of about 20 senators, according to the New York Times, from both parties who met throughout the weekend to try to hammer out a compromise to present to Leader McConnell and Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. This group was discussing a plan in which the government would stay open through early February, so it would be a very short-term spending appropriation bill to be coupled with a promise that the Senate would work to tackle the issue of immigration in the coming weeks. A major lingering question was how a compromise might pave the way for passage of legislation to protect the young, undocumented immigrants that are known as Dreamers. We remember not in the not-too-distant past, or late last year, President Trump decided to end this Obama-era program, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, also known as DACA, that shields them from deportation. Many on if we did a broad characterization, many on the left said that this was a very unkind, uncompassionate thing for President Trump to do. And then many on the right came over to the other side and said that this wasn't a suitable, this wasn't a stable solution. Because at the end of the day, this was an executive action, and an executive action very much it's very temporal in nature. And wanting to give them a more sure and solid foundation, President Trump decided that he was going to put an end to this in executive action come March, but with as much foresight and as much runway time that he gave the Congress to be able to come to a compromise, to be able to put something into passage, to put a law, and specifically to put a bill to get to his desk to provide a more stable environment for these 800,000 individuals. Well, now what we find is we're coming to the end of January, coming to the very beginning of February, and we still don't have anything yet. And so there's still that lack of stability. And what we're continuing to see is that Democrats very much want it to continue to continue forward with what's currently in place. But Republicans, it's not because of lack of compassion, because again, that's a mischaracterization of the position. It's not a lack of compassion. They want a much more stable positioning for these Dreamers, i.e., they don't want just an executive action put forward. They want something that's put into law, because we are a society of laws. The rule of law provides stability, and stability is a good ally of our government. So for as long as the government's closed, the White House has said it will not entertain demands on immigration, according to the New York Times. Senators in the bipartisan group proceeded anyway in discussing a compromise in which there would be some kind of promise that the Senate would address the issue. There are certain individuals that would claim that in the White House there is an individual, specifically policy advisor Stephen Miller, that has been a very hardened voice on immigration. And Lindsey Graham over the weekend, the senator from South Carolina, said that as long as Stephen Miller is exercising influence in the White House, there will be no movement forward because of his doubled down recalcitrant beliefs relative to immigration. So what do you think? We'd love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump over to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And jumping on over there, you'll be able to find an opportunity to be able to meet, to be able to talk about it, or to be able to share your comment. And I'll be sure to share that online as well. And so we've been talking about this government shutdown and how it's affecting not only just individuals within our own circle and sphere, but we also have to remember there are military members right now that are moving in active duty military that are in hostile zones. And the reality of this government shutdown is that they are not getting paid right now. According to Politico, what we continue to see is that these active duty military, active duty, to give you a scope, is around 1.3 million individuals in active duty military. Now, not all of them are stationed overseas in hostile areas, but as long as the government shutdown is in place right now, these active duty military will continue to work, but they will not be paid until after the shutdown is resolved. And so you can see that there's a heightened sense that there needs to be work that's done. That even Senator Claire McCaskill, the Democrat out of Missouri, that's up for re-election in the 2018 cycle, specifically, she's going to go against an individual named Josh Hawley in all likelihood in the Missouri race. She introduced a bill over the weekend to be able to pay these individuals, to pay our service members, and that bill was shot down and not even entertained a vote on the Senate floor by Mitch McConnell. And so there's a sense that even our military aren't being shut down. But like has been mentioned before, what we were talking about, according to Politico, it says, quote, shutdowns end up being more expensive. If we look to the past and the times in which that's happened relative to 2013, as well as the 2 or 3 other times that it happened in here recent memory, shutdowns end up being more expensive just than keeping the government open. We're talking about the cost is at tens of millions of dollars. So how are we to think about this from a biblical perspective, right? If we believe it to be true that the Bible is a light to our, a lamp to our feet and a guide for our path, according to Psalm 119, what does it look like from the biblical perspective to think about this government shutdown? Well, the scriptures are relatively silent concerning government shutdowns. There hasn't been much that's been said on that, but we can look pretty closely in history and be able to find that in Acts 15, the factions relative to the church really did come to an impasse, hence the reason why they had the Jerusalem Council. There were some that said that you needed to be circumcised in order to be able to join the way, which was following after Jesus. And then there were others that were saying that these good works testify that they have saving faith in Jesus and they don't necessarily need to be circumcised. So they come to the Jerusalem Council and they're able to reach a compromise one with another in order that they might move forward in unity of spirit and the bonds of peace. Well, we are not talking about salvation. This is just our government, but I think some helpful things that we can be praying for our leaders specifically is we can pray for our leaders to have immeasurable wisdom. We know it to be true that we're called to pray for our leaders according to 1 Timothy 2, 1 and 2. But not only are we called to pray for them, but we can ask our God who says he will give us immeasurable wisdom if we ask, from James 1:5. One of the things that I'm praying for specifically is they would have the discipline to refrain from wrathful responses. Because what we know to be true from Proverbs 15:1 is a wrathful response stirs up anger, but a gentle answer calms the waters. And so I'm praying that they would have be disciplined to refrain from wrathful responses, and then a keen ability to listen to the other side, to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. To be able to listen to the other side and not necessarily to demonize them, but to be tried and true to their positions in order that they might move forward in such a way that hopefully each party can find some bit of semblance and compromise moving forward. We'd love to hear from you. You can call in 800-351-1212, and we'll be back right after this.
With the way things are going right now, there's got to be a source of truth somewhere.
Eric lives in California, and he's listened to Point of View since he was a child hanging around his dad's auto shop in Nevada. He says it's his only trustworthy source of information about what's happening in the world.
Well, I feel bad because I have not been donating, and I'll tell you what, I'm getting back to that because just recently I realized with all the junk going on, with all the media, with all these news things, the only one that I count on is you guys. And what would I do if you guys weren't there? I don't know what I'd do. Where would I get my news? And I would be dead in water. So I got to do my part.
Make sure you do your part, like Eric. Join the Truth Team. Get all the details by calling 1-800-347-5151 or visit online, pointofview.net/team. Support the truth and make a difference for the future. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View on this January 22nd, 2018 day. I am Nick Pitts. During the first 30 minutes of the show, we've been talking about the government shutdown and how there really is just a central issue. There's a variety of issues that we could talk about, everything from kind of the border security component to what some are talking about, to the military pay, defense spending that's going up, to the idea of the children's health insurance program. But really the central issue really revolves around immigration. You have the Democrats that are wanting wanting to see the Dreamers become citizens, on the 800,000 individuals that through no act of their own have been brought here, but really want to see them become citizens. And then on the Republican side, that there's a hesitancy towards that end at this particular juncture, but do want some guaranteed money to be able to fund the wall. And we've been talking about that during the first 30 minutes, but we're going to pivot and talk about something significant that happened over the weekend over in Afghanistan. There was a marathon deadly siege on a major hotel in Afghanistan's capital of Kabul, and it ended in the killing of all the gunmen who fought off security forces for 16 hours. It was really just a very tragic, very significant way that really does point to something even bigger that we'll be talking about later on. The Taliban claimed responsibility for the attack on the heavily guarded Intercontinental Hotel, which left at least 18 civilians dead as well as 20 wounded. They were dressed in army uniforms and armed with automatic weapons. The attackers stormed the building on Saturday evening. Special forces rushed into the scene to fight the attackers in a gun battle that continued well into Sunday. There were four Afghan civilians and 14 foreigners were among those killed. This Intercontinental Hotel is really known as kind of one of the premier hotels for individuals, for high capacity officials as well as dignitaries and others to stay when they are in the region. The four attackers were also killed during this time. Afghan airline company Com Air said in a statement that some of the employees have been killed and wounded in the attack. The company used the hotel to accommodate its staff. One of the fascinating things that's happened is we see the Taliban have not only claimed responsibility for this, but have reminded us yet again that they are still thriving and still working in a pretty significant fashion. Authorities rescued 153 people, including more than 40 foreigners, again showing kind of the international component to this particular hotel from the building during the gun battle with the attackers, which again lasted more than 13 hours. So remember, though that they were toppled in 2001 for harboring al-Qaeda, the Taliban in Afghanistan have not been defeated. They boast an estimated core of about 60,000 fighters and hold sway over civilians near its strongholds in the country's south as well as the east. A cursory look over, if you type in Google and you type in Afghanistan, you're really going to see probably a high likelihood that you're going to see a very mountainous region. That it really is in that mountainous region. It's very difficult to be able to find individuals that are hiding out there, because it really does provide enclaves and little respites for some of these factions to not only be able to foster, but also really be able to grow in strength and in number right now. And so to give you kind of a glimpse at, there's 60,000 core fighters within the Taliban in Afghanistan, according to the Council on Foreign Relations. But when you compare that to ISIS is less than 10,000 now. So that the ravaging that they've been doing, they're minuscule in number in comparison to the Taliban right now. According to Stratfor, which is another geopolitical kind of think tank organization, the Taliban have gained significant control over the mountainous countryside and are continuing to ramp up their efforts to seize more critical urban terrain, like the Intercontinental Hotel, which is a luxury hotel chain. In the scriptures, we read about God's love for justice and the call for governments to enact that justice and punish evildoers. Look no further than God's love for justice than Isaiah 61:8, how it says, quote, God who loves justice, as well as Romans 13:1-7. What we continue to see is that God has placed the power and authority for the governments of the world to be able to enact justice and punish the evildoer. If you have a few moments, would you mind praying for the families that have lost loved ones in this tragedy and the government that must now enact justice after this tragedy? What are we to think about this? What do you think about this? We would love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can jump on over to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, that is facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And when you get on over there, you'll be able to see, unfortunately, you'll be able to see me, but then unfortunately, you'll be able to leave a comment as well. What we continue to see is that the Taliban have continued to exercise their influence and sway over this particular region. Afghanistan has always been kind of what some would consider really just a very difficult situation, that they've experienced tumult throughout their entire history. And in the midst of that tumult, in the midst of that leadership vacuum, there has been individuals that have come in that have tried to rule for good, but also individuals and entities that have ruled in a less than good manner, but also an evil manner. And that's what the Taliban, we might consider the Taliban to be doing right now. The Taliban have been ruling and reigning in such a way that really has been for the detriment of the people and has tried to exert themselves in such a way that really does establish dominance in the region. And this again shows us this latest overture that ISIS is doing, or the Taliban is doing rather. They're moving outside the mountainous countryside and they're moving into the urban centers. And it's only a matter of time that we now see that not only are they moving into the urban centers, but they have really, this is very symbolic in nature, to really exercise dominance and to take over this Intercontinental Hotel. Again, no connection to the Intercontinental Hotel here in Dallas or some of the other chains. This is its own entity, but really is this international hub whereby high capacity individuals, diplomats, and officials really do reside here. And so this is going to continue to be a looming threat. Now, the natural reaction, I guess, for an American listener is to say, well, do we need to do something? Well, I think the first thing that we need to do, especially from a Christian perspective, is to pray for the situation, to pray for the individuals that have lost, but also to pray for the individuals that now it's up to them to be able to enact justice. But we need to figure out what does it look like kind of moving forward. And again, we would love to hear from you. That number, 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. Or you can hop on over to the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. What was fascinating is over on foxnews.com, on Fox News, there was actually an account from an individual that had talked about how she was actually in the hotel room when all of this was happening. An individual named Mohammed Shams, who was the telecommunications director for the East Langham province, who was visiting Kabul and staying at the hotel, saying rather he was able to escape by jumping into a tree from a hotel window as the attackers roamed the hallway. So picture this for a second. This individual is in his room. All of a sudden, he can hear the attackers outside the room. And what does he do? He opens the window and jumps into a tree in order to be able to save his own life. Sham says that it was the worst night of my life. He says that as he ran, he didn't know who were the police and who were the Taliban, but they all had the same uniforms. That's an important distinguishing characteristic that we have to remind ourselves of. These are individuals that looked just like the special forces units that the Afghani officials would be wearing. These individuals, that shows you just kind of the level playing field, but also kind of some of the deception that the Taliban is using in this particular region, as well as the reaches that they have to be able to secure those type of uniforms. It's very significant. And so when he was in his hotel room, there were individuals that were roaming outside the hallways, and instead of just staying in there, he opens his window, jumps into a tree, and when he jumps into the tree, he shimmies down, and then as he's running away, he really doesn't know who are the Afghan officials and who are these Taliban officials. If you look at if you look on the website, if you'll type in the Intercontinental Hotel of Kabul, of Kabul in Afghanistan, what you'll see is they're just trees, and it really is a mountainous countryside. Because again, what we continue to see is the Taliban has always exercised dominance, exercised dominance and kind of a provincial stake in some of these countrysides in the south and east part of the country that, again, are inching closer and closer towards the power centers in order that they might be able to exercise their influence as well as to rule and to lead the Afghanistan region. This region has always been a very tumultuous, very unstable region. But if the Taliban continues to gain control in this particular country, that will only continue moving forward. I would love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can hop over on the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll share your comments and your questions on air, rather. And so when we come back after this break, we'll continue talking about some of the government shutdown as well as what's happening relative to what's happening in Taliban, Afghanistan. But we'll also be talking about something interesting. Again, another congressman has come out and the allegations have moved forward relative to some of his sexual misconduct within the office. And now he's been stripped of his seat on the ethics committee. And what does that look like? Specifically, I did some research on actually what does the process look like. And if you want to be discouraged, you'll continue listening in because it's really just a very despicable process. And we'll be talking about that after the commercial break, as well as Facebook changing up their algorithm to really, we're going to be seeing less news in our Facebook feed, as well as more biased news. We'd love to hear from you, but be sure to tune back in, and we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Smithsonian Institution has appointed its first curator of religion in over 100 years. Peter Manseau, the new curator, explains that you can't tell the story of America without the role of religion in it. According to Manseau, among the first exhibits to be displayed will be a church bell crafted by Paul Revere, Thomas Jefferson's Bible that cut out the portions he did not believe, a manuscript from the Book of Mormon, a Muslim text that once belonged to an African slave, and even a Torah scroll damaged by Hessians during the War for Independence. Manseau also intends to display a compass used by Roger Williams to find his way to Rhode Island when he was exiled from Massachusetts for his religious beliefs, a display that Manseau hopes will help Americans ponder what religious liberty looked like in the context of the founding of our country. The new curator is right. You cannot tell the story of America without telling the role religion has played in making our country what it is today. And that includes the role of religious liberty. These artifacts from our history point to the real stories of Americans committed to the historically radical idea that government respect a person's right to honor his conscience before God. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back on Point of View on this January 22nd, 2018 day. I am Nick Pitts, and we have been talking about everything from the congressional government shutdown that's happened and a looming Senate vote that will happen around noonday this morning. And we were also talking about the Taliban and what was happening over there over the weekend and how there was really just a symbolic overtaking or attack, rather, on the Intercontinental Hotel. And now we're going to jump on over some domestic issues and specifically, unfortunately, stuff that we've heard before, but is also a new example of just some of the kind of the corruption that's kind of evading and is a part of the Washington scene. Over the weekend, Representative Patrick Meehan, a Pennsylvania Republican who's taken a leading role in fighting sexual harassment in Congress, used thousands of dollars in taxpayer money to settle his own misconduct complaint after a former aide accused him last year of making unwanted romantic overtures to her, according to several people familiar with the sentiment, according to the New York Times. He's a married father of three. He's long expressed interest in the life of a personal aide. He's decades younger and has been regarded as a kind of a father figure, who regarded him as a father figure. The woman became romantically involved, according to the New York Times, with a particular individual outside of the office. Then Mr. Meehan, who's the congressman, again, out of Pennsylvania, professed his romantic desires for her first in person, then in a handwritten letter, and it grew hostile when she did not reciprocate. Life in the office became untenable, so she initiated a complaint process, started working from home, and then ultimately left her job. Well, what's one of the frustrating things that's happening here is there's a lot of allegations, and you're wondering, well, these are kind of unfounded. Why can't anyone go on the record? Well, the reality is Congress has set up a fund and set up the process in such a way that really doesn't allow for daylight, doesn't allow for individuals to be put forward out there. I've got an article that's up on My Faith Votes, and it kind of talks about from the only thing more reprehensible than a secret harassment fund is the sheer existence of such a fund. That there is a fund that is set up within Congress that really does keep individuals from being able to voice this because of non-disclosure acts, but also keeps them from being able to work in such a way that they can kind of allow the disinfectant, which is the light, to be able to bring to light some of these issues. You see, budgets reveal values and demonstrate foresight. You put aside money for that which is of importance to you. You reflect on the past as you forecast into the coming year how you anticipate spending that hard-earned money. Our budget not only anticipates this kind of behavior by our elected officials and our staff, they also plan to keep it private, which is one of the fascinating components of this congressional fund. It's filled and littered at every step of the process with a private component. And some can't keep their hands to themselves, but they want to keep these despicable actions to themselves. From sea to shining sea, what started in Hollywood with Harvey Weinstein has now impacted Washington, D.C. with congressional officials such as John Conyers to Blake Farenthold down in Texas. Since 1997, there have been more than 200 secret payouts out of this fund. You heard that right. Since 1997, there have been more than 200 secret payouts, totaling, hear me, $17 million. $17 million, 200 secret payouts out of this fund that's one of the designated funds to use to be able to keep these individuals from being able to speak up on the harassment that they're put on by our elected officials. While not every payout in the fund is for sexual misconduct, one payout, I think we can all agree, is one too many. The fund does more than just rectify the wrongs of our elected officials. It enables this despicable behavior that would get the majority of us fired from our job, but keeps them in their job. What individual, when they act out on the office in a way that's unbecoming, that what we consider sexual harassment, gets to keep their job, one, but then has the office be able to pay the legal bills for it? It just seems unrealistic. While we don't know the identities of the predators, but we do know how the process works. Because, again, there's non-disclosure acts and there's secrecy that keeps them, that's littered all throughout the process. According to Politico, if a congressional employee is wronged, they go to the compliance office in order to obtain a password to access the necessary forms to file a request for counseling, mediation, or harassment claim. You heard that first. The victim has to go find a password in order to obtain the forms. Then they're required to undergo mandatory mediation or counseling themselves. So they get a password. The password allows them to access the forms. The forms, before they can fill them out, they have to go through a mediation process or counseling. After the counseling from the victim, they have to go and formally pursue a complaint with the compliance office. And here's where it gets interesting. A hearing officer examines their allegations and reaches a decision within 90 days. So you have an individual that has been wronged. They have to go find a password. They go find a password to be able to access the forms. Then they have to go to get counseling. Then they fill out the form. And then it's 90 days until they hear a response. But here's where it's really interesting. If the officer finds that the payout is necessary, the top Democrat and Republican on the House Administration Committee approved the settlement. Meehan was on the committee, according to some. It was on the committee that approved the settlement that allowed this woman that he has been sexually harassing to receive money for what he had done, all in an effort to keep it secret, too, because we don't know, because non-disclosure forms are littered all throughout this process. An attorney who's represented several clients pursuing harassment claims through the compliance office said in an interview with Politico, the trappings of confidentiality, they permeate the process. The law is written to create a system to disincentivize staffers from moving forward. Both secretive and significant, this process reflects the worst-kept secret in America, specifically our porn addiction. In 2016, over $4.5 billion were dedicated to watching porn sites. Human beings have spent 1 million years watching pornography since 2015. Surveys indicate 79% of American men between the ages of 18 and 30 to admit to watching porn, quote, regularly. 67% of men between the ages of 31 to 49 admit to it. And concerning men from 50 to 68, 50% confess to regular pornography viewing. 1 in 3 porn users are women. As many as 12% of all websites, hear me, 12% of all websites contains some form of pornography. Hollywood makes 400 movies a year. The porn industry produces 11,000. Every second, 28,258 users are watching pornography on the internet. Every minute, $184,000 is being spent on pornography on the internet. The financial cost to business productivity in the U.S. is estimated at $16.9 billion annually. These numbers demonstrate the pervasiveness of the problem, but they also reveal a great demand. Where there is a demand, supply inevitably follows. In our environment, the supply has a soul, but the men who demand their attention cast aside their manners and the woman's dignity, all for the sake of selfish pleasure. Porn creates a demand and alters the mind. Instead of seeing people as image bearers worthy of respect and dignity, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, they're seen as pleasure providers worthy of a second look, endowed by their creator with certain appealing characteristics. They're no longer people you respect, but objects you use. The pervasiveness of pornography shows the depth of human depravity, but it also demonstrates the need for human intimacy. Pornography gives the illusion of intimacy, but leaves the victim still lonely. Pornography is bad fruit from the rotten tree of false intimacy. Sexual harassment forces innocent victims to eat that fruit and leaves the taxpayer to foot the bill and pay for the repercussions of the porn industry. Enough is enough. And so, what is your point of view? We would love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can leave a comment on the Facebook page, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, that's facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And when you go onto the Facebook page, you can leave a comment or a question, and unfortunately, you have to see me. But when you leave a comment or a question, we'll be able to share some of that online as well, or on air as well. But we're gonna have to take one of those breaks. But when we come back, we're gonna have a great show coming up in the second hour. We've got Cynthia Wenz, who's going to be in studio, as well as Claire Culwell will be calling in, and we will be talking about an upcoming Council for Life issues. Since this is the day that's the Sanctity of Life Day here in the U.S., an opportunity for us just to examine what are some of the great strides that are being made in the pro-life movement, as well as what are some steps that we can take in order to create a more of a culture for life. We'll be back right after this.
What difference does it make when you support Point of View? For Lee Weaver and his family, it meant doing something to reach out to women in need, and so far, to help bring nearly 5,000 babies into the world.
As a family, we were sitting around the dinner table. Our older daughter said, "Dad, we need to do something about it." And that kind of struck a chord in our family. All of that started out of Point of View and the effect it had on our conversations and our heart, leading us into don't be hearers only, but doers of the word. Point of View has always been real supporters of the concept that we're a small part of.
Your support of Point of View inspires people to do great things. You partner in spreading truth around the world. But the only way to make that happen is for you to make the call or visit us online and join the Truth Team. 1-800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Do it now. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View.
And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts on this January 22nd, 2018 day, National Sanctity of Life Day here across the U.S. And so during the first hour, we really spent some time talking about everything from the government shutdown to also what's the Taliban, what happened over the weekend relative to their kind of taking down a hotel, the Intercontinental Hotel in Kabul, to then really what was happening in Congress, specifically with Representative Meehan and some of the allegations that came out against him and stripping him from the ethics committee. But we are totally pivoting because we're going to give emphasis to this National Sanctity of Life Day. And we have in studio with us right now, Cynthia Wenz. Cynthia, how are you today?
Good morning. I am lovely.
So good. So Cynthia is a nationally recognized voice in the life movement. Cynthia champions the healing available to all who have directly or indirectly experienced the pain of reproductive grief and loss due to abortion. She was the president and CEO of The Source for Women, a holistic reproductive health center in 2009-2017, and has been named one of the top 30 most influential women in Houston. Cynthia and her rock-solid man of God husband, Chris, live in Houston and have 3 sons, Roman, Justice, and Caleb. And I hear your husband's not only a rock-solid man of God, or I read that, also sings a little James Taylor?
And plays a little guitar and sounds just like him.
Okay, so maybe during the commercial break, we're going to listen to him, but then we'll bring him on.
Honey, you're on.
That's great. So, Cynthia, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. Give us some background information on you.
Mother of 3 men, grandmother to 1 little man, Titus, so cute. Grew up in South Philly, transplanted to Houston, Texas. Certainly a poster child for everything not to do as a teen and everything you don't want your child to do. And then totally redeemed. And now, take your greatest shame and go nationwide and talk about it.
Wow. So tell us a little bit about what was that moment like when you were redeemed? Was there friends? Was it just a situation that you were in? How did that happen?
I call it the artichoke of healing.
Okay. Wow.
God's love is instant. His healing is immediate. But for those of us with rock heads and just unwilling and kicking against the goads, it was an artichoke of healing. And I think it was his grace as well, because I couldn't handle everything at one time. So one layer got peeled back. We're going to clean that layer up. And when I got stronger, then the next layer was peeled back. That was about 23 years of healing.
Wow. It kind of reminds me of, so in the biblical narrative, whenever Peter finds himself, you see Peter, there's a move from a great sense of I'm aware of my weaknesses, but also kind of a sense of strength. I remember when Jesus and Peter were going fishing, and being from Tennessee, that just greatly increases affinity within my own spirits. And so when Jesus and Peter were going fishing, the closer that he got to Jesus, the more aware of his situation and kind of his sin that he became. And that's what it sounds like for you. It really was a walking with Jesus. And whenever you got closer, there was pulling back the artichoke and really did illuminate some room for improvement.
And that's actually the message.
Wow.
Because regardless of the voice that we hear coming at us, the voice that is so adamant about abortion is legal and it's a right, or the woman who's experienced that and says, I don't want to talk about it, whatever end of the spectrum it is, I think the wisdom I have discovered is journey through until you get to that place. And what is that place for you? Well, for me, that place was wholly redeemed, fully transformed, able to talk vertically. I used to be a puddle on the floor, a mess. I have 3 children in heaven, Nick. Not 1 child, not 2, but 3.
Wow.
And it's so interesting. Even my dear liberal friends who want to say, well, Cynthia, I love you, but I am pro-choice. And I remember looking at a friend that I spin with. I'm a spinning instructor. And I said, do you realize I have 3 children in heaven? And she was offended by that. I said, but wait a minute, you're pro-choice. And she said, well, yeah, one time I understand. I said, but wait a minute, why is the choice limited?
Wow.
Isn't it my discretion? I mean, it's an interesting dialogue, but it's finding that mutual ground and continuing the journey until that conversation is reasonable and courteous of the other person.
Wow. And so we're going to continue the conversation with Cynthia, but we're also going to allow you to be able to call in as well. So you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And then we'll also be taking some of your comments and questions on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, where you can kind of share, and we'll be able to share those online. And so one of those questions that I have, Cynthia, for you is, how did you become involved in the pro-life movement? Well, was there a series of actions that really stepped in? What really propelled you from being an individual that had abortion, from what it sounds like, then to being a voice to speak for life? How did that happen?
I love this question. So can I ask you a personal question?
Yep.
And you do not have to answer.
Oh, I'm so going to answer it.
Are you married?
I'm not married.
Okay. This is a word for you. Are you ready?
I'm so ready.
I was 34 years old when I got married.
Okay.
And way too old. Smoking, looking at God, going, I don't think you made me ugly. Where is my husband? What are you waiting for? I had already had a child out of wedlock. And I'm mad at God, and I'm shaking my finger at him. And I said, I'm waiting for my tall, dark, handsome, good Christian millionaire. I want him to be single. I want him to love you. I want him to love Roman. And I want him to absolutely adore me. Well, I got him. I'm waiting on the million, but I got him. And I'm just going to believe God that it's coming. But in the marriage is the representation of God's covenant, right? Mm-hmm. So the woman, Ephesians tells us, seeks the Lord and then becomes one with the husband. Husband, Ephesians 5 tells us, seeks the Lord and then covers the bride, right? So it's the bride and the bridegroom. So this bride was broken, horribly broken. My 21-year-old son, who I raised in my brokenness, he even said to me, Mom, you're such a different mother now. My daughter-in-law and I just had this wonderful conversation. It had an impact on Roman as to how I raised him. My husband dealt with a broken wife for the first 8 years of our marriage, and it wasn't pretty. I wasn't kind. Broken lashes out broken. And so his love covered me. And at one point in the 8th year of our marriage, he said to me, spinning students of ours recommended that place, hey, that pregnancy center. And why don't you, there's a verse in John that says, if you give away healing, your healing would be made full. And I'm married to a worship leader, right? Mm-hmm. And he said, why don't you go give it away? Because you can't even hear the word abortion without that offense rising up in you and that heartbreak. So it was anger and it was heartbreak. You're still reconciling. And I went to the Pregnancy Resource Center. A 24-year-old director said, you're post-abortive. You need to go through our healing journey. You need to kind of get yourself, your head wrapped around all the details for the women you'll be serving. And I went in prideful. It was horrible. I'm going to help people. And the Lord whammied me and healed me. But a wise man of God stood beside me and loved me enough to say, go serve, go give it away. I don't even think he knew how wonderfully God would give it back to me. And here I am.
Wow, that's fascinating. It reminds me that love covers a multitude of sins.
Exactly.
And not only love covers a multitude of sins, but love compels us. And that love is always compelling us because at the end of the day, God's plans are better than our dreams. And so we're going to continue with Cynthia, and we'll be taking some of your comments and questions, but we've got to take one of those breaks right now. And so when we come back from break, we're going to continue to talk about what did that process look like for her as she came to deal with just the decisions that she made, and then where did that take her? Because that's, I think, really going to be one of the exciting things we'll talk about right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Today is the anniversary of Roe v. Wade, when the Supreme Court removed most state restrictions on abortion back in 1973. Who could have predicted the world we live in today? When the ruling came down, few understood the long-term implications. I remember speaking on the issue in college classrooms a few years later and wondering when the Supreme Court would reverse its decision. By the 1980s, it seemed like only a matter of time that abortion would once again be restricted in America. That did not happen. A whole generation of young people have grown up never having known a time when abortions were illegal. They may have seen some protests and may have heard some debate about the subject, but that perhaps is the sum total of their experience. Abortion has left a scar on the soul of this nation, just like the scar slavery left on America's soul in previous centuries. Unfortunately, many Americans cannot see the scar that abortion has left on this country. I see the evidence of these scars when I take phone calls from women who are exploited by abortion. I see evidence of these scars when I hear the cavalier comments of young people about human life. I see those scars when I hear people debate related issues like stem cell research and physician-assisted suicide. But I also see the healing when I see the good work of pregnancy resource centers. I understand from people working in this area that there are 3 times as many pregnancy resource centers in this country as there are abortion clinics. In many ways, the pro-life movement is winning the war of ideas. And I'm encouraged that so many young people, our future leaders, are pro-life and understand the importance of being pro-life. So there are some encouraging signs even as we see the scars left by abortion. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View on this January 22nd, 2018 day. We have Cynthia, Wenz in studio. We also have Claire Culwell for the Council of Lifer event over phone right now. Claire, are you there?
I'm here. Thanks
Hey,
for having me.
so great to have Claire on. So Claire met her biological mother back in March of 2009. Her birth mother told her that her life was a miracle. Claire's biological mom became pregnant at the age of 13. And so now Claire is such a significant part of the pro-life movement here in the Dallas area. So Claire, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, what got you involved in the pro-life movement. I'm sure our listeners would love to hear.
Sure. So my sister and I are adopted, and we always knew that we had birth mothers that chose life for us and gave us our families, and we always were curious, you know, who they were, what their stories were. And so my sister had met her birth mother in 2008, and I got to thank her for giving me my sister, and it got me thinking about my birth mother. And so I decided that I would search for my birth mother, and so I did in 2009. And we met, and it was a great reunion, and I brought my family and she brought her family. I got to meet my half-sisters. It was wonderful. And so we decided that I would go visit her. And when I visited her, I had brought her this gift. And it was a ring and a necklace with my birthstone on it, and I wanted it to be something that would remind her of what she did for me, how grateful I was to her for choosing life and for giving me my family. And when I gave her that gift, I gave her a card that said, "Thank you for choosing life for me. That's the greatest gift I've ever received." And I watched as she opened that gift she cried happy tears as she saw the ring and the necklace, and then I watched as she read the words on the card, and her happy tears turned into really sad tears. And she began to tell me that when she was pregnant with me, she actually had a surgical late-term abortion at 5 months along in her pregnancy, but I survived it, and I was actually a twin. And my twin was successfully aborted, but I survived, and she actually tried to have a second abortion in Kansas, but because she was now 6 months along in her pregnancy, they weren't able to do that, and I was born 2 weeks after that second attempt. And so, as you can imagine, that's not something I ever thought I would find out when I met my birth mother, but I'm so thankful for her willingness to allow me to share it with people, because it really puts a face with what people are fighting for in the pro-life movement. So I'm really grateful.
Wow, what a powerful story, Claire. So you again were a survivor of an abortion, and now really find yourself in a position where you were wanting to, not only you fought in the womb, but you were wanting to continue to fight for life outside the womb as well, right?
I am, yeah. I have a almost 5-year-old daughter, and the day she was born, I realized that she wouldn't be here if that abortion had been successful in my life. And so, you know, there's a domino effect to abortion that never just affects that one person that walks into an abortion clinic and has an abortion. It affects far more people than that, whether we realize it or ever know it or not. And so, I'm fighting for people just like myself, just like my daughter, people that wouldn't be here if abortion had taken our lives. So,
wow. And Cynthia, we've got Cynthia that's in studio here. Cynthia and I were sharing over the break, and Cynthia, you have a similar story, right?
Hi, Claire.
Hi, Cynthia.
It's just crazy hearing your voice. You know, I am the mother that on my third termination terminated unknowingly twins, and my son Roman survived the pregnancy. So I just have been looking at you, and you have to just, I'm the mother's eyes. Like I'm tearing up in the studio. Wow. I'm the mother's eyes looking at you and just celebrating your life. It's interesting, too. My son Roman survived. His twin was successfully terminated. And isn't this crazy? I always thought his twin was a girl. And I get to be with you on Wednesday and here in the studio today. And what an honor. Sorry,
no, you're
I
fine.
bunny trailed, but I'm just like, I have mother's tears. Hey, Claire, can I ask you a question real quick?
Sure.
Your mom was 13 when she conceived you and your twin. And what I have a 13-year-old. That's the part of your story. Your survival, what God is doing with you is miraculous. But my heart for your mother, and that's like you said, I love your words about this is such a domino effect. Like, what was your mother's circumstance that she would have wound up pregnant at 13?
So my birth mother came from a divorced family. She lived with her mother, who worked multiple jobs to take care of her and her two siblings. And so she said that she was just kind of searching for love in other people. And so she found herself pregnant at 13. And, you know, just as any 13-year-old does, she was looking to her parents. And her parents said, you know, this is the best thing for you. You're 13. You're not ready to be a mother. I'm not ready to be a grandmother, et cetera, et cetera. And so she did what her parents said was best, and she had an abortion. And I tell people all the time, you know, I cannot tell people that if I was in that situation at 13, if my parents had told me, you know, this is the best thing for you to have an abortion, I can't say that I would not have done that. But I tell people all the time, I asked my birth mother 21 years later when I met her, I asked her if I could share this story. And this was her deepest, darkest, most painful secret. Nobody knew, not her husband, not her children, not her friends. Nobody knew. And she gave me permission to share this because she never wants another little girl like herself, another woman, another family to experience what we have because of abortion.
Yes. Cynthia, I've got a question. Like, when you think about it too, like, there's just a sense that there's a sense of shame that keeps individuals. There's a sense of guilt that keeps individuals from really speaking out on this particular issue. But then if you just look at the numbers, though, there's just a significant amount of women that are going through such instances, like especially within the church. Numbers indicate anywhere from 45 to 55% of abortions are committed by church-going Christians. And so what are you doing? How can we help to create a culture of life, one, but then two, to find grace for those individuals that have made that decision but don't have to be bogged down and shackled to that decision in the past?
Well, there's two things. So let's start with this. What's the grand total of abortions in our nation since its inception 46 years ago, 45 years ago?
It's got to be in the millions, right?
55 million, wow. 60 million. So if you think about that, there are mothers, now grandmothers, daughters, women. Okay, so let me just flip the tables for just a second. Think about the Mothers Against Drunk Driving movement. They simply said, we're tired of our children getting hurt. This is senseless. We then saw safety belts. We saw designated drivers. We saw this movement. Now, I'm of the school of thought it's not what we're against. There's enough people screaming against abortion, but it's what we're for. So let's talk about what we're for. We are for healed, healthy women of God in healthy relationships, living life to the full. John 10:10, right? Abundant life, amazing marriages, amazing children. We're in the land of opportunity. So the shame, I think, is the lie that we're supposed to believe. Okay, so now with that, what if the millions of women who have walked through abortion found their voice? What if they walked through to full redemption? And what if they simply stood up and said, I made that choice. I did exercise free choice. I wouldn't wish that on my child. I pray that my child has more information. They know more, KNOW, to say no. No. We look back at the civil rights movement and we think, wow, the skin tone caused us to think you were less than. I mean, now we're talking proximity of a child makes that child less than. Can we not educate a generation so that they can grow up? I truly think we'll look back in 30 years and go, can you imagine 12-year-old kids talking, oh my gosh, do you remember back in like the early 2000s? It's like terrible. Like they would have this thing, it was called an abortion and like, they would take it. I mean, can you imagine? It would be so far-fetched. So shame is what I think keeps the body of Christ silent.
Yeah.
And what I would say to the women in the church is God is our Redeemer.
Yeah.
God is our healer. And it's not the job description you sign up for. It's just what Claire said. She said, I never thought I would hear what my birth mother said to me.
Yeah. So it always reminds me that grace or guilt says that I've done wrong. Shame says that I am wrong, but the gospel says that I've been made right because of him. And so we're going to continue talking with both Cynthia and Claire right after this.
If you've listened for any length of time, you've probably heard about Point of View listeners who've done amazing things, started ministries, found their life's calling, impacted their city, their state, the nation. But let me be clear, you don't have to have a huge impact to be faithful. I thought about that when I read a note from Joanne in Texas. She admitted, up until recently, I've not had much of a political view, nor have I ever been so informed. But since I signed up for your email and website information, I can now get the correct information that the public is oblivious to. Joanne ended by thanking us for the Take Action section of our website, where we make it easy for you to express your views on key issues with your elected representatives. Everything we do on the air, online, through mail and email is made possible through people like you who invest in Point of View so we can invest in issues that matter. Take your place on the Truth Team. Call 1-800-347-5151 or sign up online at pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team.
Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, and we have been talking in studio with Cynthia Wenz and also over the phone with Claire Culwell about the Council for Life event and just their personal stories about how abortion has affected them, but also how they are now moving in such a way that that might be a voice for the life movement that's happening. And Claire, I'm interested in you. Claire, are you a millennial by chance?
I am.
Okay.
I'm 29.
Okay, so you're a millennial with me. So we're selfie-taking, Snapchatting, Uber-riding millennials together. And so I think one of the interesting things that what's just fascinating that I don't think individuals know is that largely millennials are very much pro-life in orientation, correct?
Yes, we are.
Yeah, there's just a sense that we very much want to be a part of that, and we understand like this is a life issue, especially if we recognize to be true from a biblical standpoint, but even from a constitutional standpoint, that we have certain inalienable rights, those being life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, especially from the biblical standpoint, too, of just recognizing from Jeremiah 1 that he's formed us within the womb, that he's known the number of days that were before us and fashioned those days from Psalm 139. And so I would love, Claire, for you to help our listeners better understand what are some of the ways in which you're moving and working to be able to create a culture of life here in the U.S.
Sure. So there are so many, ways to create a culture of life, but I think the most important thing is that there are so many things that we can do. But so many people are silent on the issue. Like you said, they're scared to say anything or do anything. It's a controversial issue. But not doing anything is the worst thing we can do. Mm-hmm. And so I think that for me, the most important thing is creating a culture of life by making abortion unthinkable and reaching out to people in a peaceful, loving, caring way. I think that there are so many ways and there are so many movements inside the pro-life movement, protesting and standing up, lobbying, all kinds of things that I think that just starting the conversation in our homes, especially with our children, our families, and then taking it further and going out and doing something about it, whatever that looks like for people, is the most important thing that we can be doing. And, for example, in Dallas, getting involved with the Council for Life and other organizations, there are pregnancy resource centers and places like that are reaching out to women in a loving, peaceful way. And I think those two words are very key in the pro-life movement because we haven't seen much progress made out of reaching out to people in any other way than a loving, peaceful, prayerful manner.
Yeah, elaborate a little bit on that, Claire. Just especially from a millennial standpoint, we're highly relational individuals, unlike any other generation that we've seen before in the American experiment. We've kind of grown up with the world on fire. We've always known war overseas. We've grown up being keenly aware of what's happening in Enron and the corruption that was happening in the business sector. We've always known political corruption, and many of us have grown up in broken homes where there's just been a less than desirable situation relative to family. So we're very relational people, hence the reason why when we're choosing jobs, we'd much rather have time off than more money because we want to keep up the relationships that we have. And then when we think about it from even just from where we're spending our money, there's been a significant uptick in spending it on travel, of going to see our friends because we're not staying in our hometowns. We're going back to those weddings. We're going back to those bachelor and bachelorette parties. And then that really does play well into your really keen insight into being a loving and peaceful movement. Elaborate on that for our listeners, especially because typically when you think about the pro-life movement, sometimes it's just picketers and can appear to be antagonistic, kind of harsh, angry people.
Yes, I think there are those people still in the pro-life movement, although I do think overall there has been, over the past 10 years, a lot of grassroots movements like 40 Days for Life that reaches out to women and men and families that are walking into abortion clinics, and their main message is reaching out in a peaceful, prayerful, loving way. And I think the reason that we have really honed in on doing it that way is because we've started to hear a lot more from people coming out of the abortion industry, the clinic workers and post-abortive men and women as well. But the clinic workers like Abby Johnson, who ran an abortion clinic for 8 years. She ran a Planned Parenthood. She saw an ultrasound-guided abortion, and then she left the abortion industry after that, and now she is fighting for life. She's one of the top pro-life advocates in the country. And she always said that the people out there that protested and didn't reach out in a loving, peaceful, prayerful way were the people that made her run quicker into the abortion clinic. But the people that were out there that reached out to her, that never gave up on her, that no matter if she cussed them out or treated them poorly, they still showed up, they still cared about her, they still asked her how her day was, even though she was going into an abortion clinic to take part in performing abortions. Those were the people that over the 8 years made her change her mind. And that, too, when she left the abortion industry, she ran to those people and into their arms and into their movement. And eventually she started working with those same people to create a culture of life. And so I think that's really important, that we listen to the people that are on the other side and what is making progress and what is changing lives and changing people's minds on the issue of life. And that's reaching out in a loving, peaceful, prayerful way. And it makes sense because we're kind of in a very defensive culture. Everybody gets their feelings hurt really quickly, and nobody wants to talk about hard things. And, we put our guard up really easily, but it's harder to put your guard up when somebody is reaching out to you in a way that you're more receptive to, a loving and peaceful and prayerful way. So it does make sense.
Yeah.
And I think it's the only way to do it, to stand for life, is that way.
Cynthia, did you have that experience? Was it the individuals that were peaceful and loving? Would you recommend that to be passed forward as you continue to try to champion life? Are those characteristics, especially for our listeners that are trying to figure out what does it look like to create the culture of life? Is the peaceful and loving component significant? What are some of the ways that they can do that? I would be very interested from your perspective.
I couldn't agree more. However, there's a loving, righteous indignation as well. Mm-hmm. And so I agree with Claire. Mm-hmm. We have to be steadfast in love, period, end of statement. Mm-hmm. You can only be steadfast in love when you have cleaned your own house first. Mm. So I personally think when emotions are escalated, there's a trigger point. I want to say why. When there's a spirit of offense that rises up, if I can just stay calm and in love and not escalate and not be triggered and just journey with that person. First Thessalonians says we share our very lives. So if I come alongside the person, the trigger doesn't overwhelm me or freak me out. I'm steadfast in love. I'm willing to listen to their story, even if it's the complete opposite of my opinion, not make any judgments and just stay with that person. I think it's that example of the steadfastness of Christ and his kindness that eventually gives them ears to hear. Because what Claire's describing is the conversation so escalated, nobody's listening. So I think it starts with getting your house in order. In other words, for me, I had to reconcile my own abortions. And I think that's what happened in the pregnancy center. She said, go through this post-abortion healing program so that you can have the conversations externally and not have your own dirt trudge up. That's the first thing. Once you're settled vertically, then you have to love steadfastly. Listening is key. Education is everything. The whole comment about abortion is just healthcare. I mean, if I could just stay steadfast in love and say, okay, Nick, define healthcare for me. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about, in other words, we all know abortion is not healthcare. It's an elective, procedure. Well, then can I have Botox on my insurance too? You know, I'm 51 years old today. Can I have, cosmetic surgery and look younger because I'm electing to have it? Or is that healthcare? I mean, there's such a muddy line. So if we just ask good questions and stay in the conversation, cause thinking to happen. The other thing is being present. I think one of the things Claire said is we don't want to talk about it. I'd rather not enter into the heated conversation. We have to show up. There's a scripture that says that which is kept in the dark will be uncovered. Mm-hmm. So I encourage people my age, go uncover it personally, men and women. Mm-hmm. I've had men in healing groups that have had 10 abortions that they know of.
Wow. We're going to continue with some of those comments because that's really powerful, and we'll be back. We have a commercial break, and if you'd like to call in, you can call in 800-351-1212, but we'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Smithsonian Institution has appointed its first curator of religion in over 100 years. Peter Manseau, the new curator, explains that you can't tell the story of America without the role of religion in it. According to Manseau, among the first exhibits to be displayed will be a church bell crafted by Paul Revere, Thomas Jefferson's Bible that cut out the portions he did not believe, a manuscript from the Book of Mormon, a Muslim text that once belonged to an African slave, and even a Torah scroll damaged by Hessians during the War for Independence. Manseau also intends to display a compass used by Roger Williams to find his way to Rhode Island when he was exiled from Massachusetts for his religious beliefs, a display that Manseau hopes will help Americans ponder what religious liberty looked like in the context of the founding of our country. The new curator is right. You cannot tell the story of America without telling the role religion has played in making our country what it is today. And that includes the role of religious liberty. These artifacts from our history point to the real stories of Americans committed to the historically radical idea that government respect a person's right to honor his conscience before God. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View on this January 22nd, 2018 day. We have in studio with us Cynthia Wenz, and also over the phone we have Claire Culwell, and they've been talking about the Council for Life and just the abortion movement, and really just the idea of being able to speak out for life and be a big advocate for life. They'll be speaking at the Council for Life event this upcoming Wednesday, but really wanted to give Cynthia some more time because she was really expounding upon some really great thoughts relative to being present, one, to journeying with individuals, two, to really find healing, to heal up before you can offer healing, really being a trophy of that grace. Continue on, Cynthia. There's some really good stuff.
We have to be a voice. We have to be a voice. Can you imagine the value of a man saying to a young man like you. I've got 10 children that I know of that are not present. The impact of that. If the community of believers that have journeyed down the path of abortion, whether they were the one facilitating it, the one that has had it, the one that is just any component of it, that domino effect Claire talked about, we have to be a voice. And so if you have not reconciled your own hurt, you can't be a voice. And I remember reading the scripture when it says, everything will be brought into the light. And I remember thinking, well, we better be the ones to bring it in the light before God brings it into the light for us. And so when people say, well, Cynthia, okay, you've put your greatest shame in a book. Well, what I love about the book, people are like, oh, you've published a book. You know what, Nick? It's not really that big a deal. You know what this is? This is my greatest shame so that I can say it so that you don't have to. If you won't say it, let my voice say it for you. Why? Because once you get it out and you can come to terms with it, then you can be that palatable voice in our nation, because it's the listening ear, the loving heart, and then the wisdom that brings the healing to those who are diabolically opposed to, we must have abortion legal in the land. The reality is that really wisdom when we're terminating life? And I can scream my opinion all day long, but if I'm not listening and educating, and I love the testimony, Claire and I have walked it. I've got nothing to gain and nothing to lose.
Wow. Yeah. So Claire, I would think the same would be true for you. I mean, I'm thinking about it from your perspective, that you really have, when you engage in some of these conversations, when you speak at these events, you really do bring a very, very powerful, unique voice that's not able just to be angry at the other side, but really is able to sympathize with the other side, because you just don't see a position, but you rather see a person, right? You see a person behind there, and that person just happens to be your birth mother, right?
Yes, I think about people on the other side, people that find themselves having abortions, people that find themselves working in the abortion industry, people that find themselves providing abortions, and I think that all of those people are just normal people, just like you and I, that are, one, looking for love, looking for answers, looking for solutions, and even people that are working inside the abortion industry.
I think Claire, we just lost Claire. We just lost Claire. So.
Though, to your point, honestly, Claire could walk in a room, she could sit in a chair and say, I am a twin that was terminated from my mother's womb, and I survived. She wouldn't have to say anything else, and just let the whole audience think.
Yeah. Yeah, part of that is, one, just and you do this really well, Cynthia, is just understanding just the power that comes from just allowing the silence just to beg the question that individuals are doing. And two, really tell us a little bit more, because again, one of the things that you've done so well is you've written a book about your pain. You've written a book to allow individuals to sit in kind of silence, to be able to read your story so that it doesn't have to be their story. Tell us a little bit about your book.
Well, I'll tell you what, it took 4 years to birth the book.
Wow.
And David Gregory actually wrote the book. He would just call me and go, I need more. And I would go back to the diaries. And I have no idea why I kept diaries as a kid, but I did, which is heartbreaking to go back and read the Hurt Little Girls commentary. For years, I pulled a veil over my own eyes, thinking I had an abortion at 15, but I really don't remember it. And when I went back and read my diary in September of my 15th year, the entry the day after the termination says, it was the day of, I killed my kid today.
Wow.
That hurt me as an adult reading that. I honestly believed I didn't remember until I read my own words in my own handwriting. So here's what we need to know. I'm the statistic, right? I terminated 3 months after my 15th birthday. I then acted out. My little synapse and my puberty brain wasn't mature enough to process what had happened. So I acted out promiscuity, alcohol, numbing, all the numbing ways we know of. Pregnant again at 19, so drug induced. That one is just so cloudy for me. And then flash forward to 29, old enough to know better, working, can absolutely handle it. Bleeding through the pregnancy, go in, terminate a third pregnancy, and 2 weeks later, you're still pregnant. We need to repeat the process. Arm goes up. I need to see what's inside of me.
Wow.
And I go for the ultrasound. So the book basically takes you on the journey of that young woman. And then, and I love one of my Patrick Henry students that worked my booth for me in D.C. when the hurricane kept me in Houston. I couldn't get up there. She said, Mama Wenz, I read your book. Those Patrick Henry kids are so smart. She read it in, an hour and a half. And she says, the first 8 chapters, I feel like I am with that young woman. And the second 8 chapters takes this dramatic turn to the adult who's looking back on, how do we solve the problem? How do we become that first responder? How are we a voice in our nation? And so the book is really that voice.
Wow.
Conversation starter, if you will.
Yeah, that's so great. And so, Claire, it sounds like you're back with us. Are you there, Claire? Okay, Claire is not with us. So, Cynthia, before we end, is there anything that you want to add? Is there something that you want to tell our listeners that perhaps maybe one of them has thought through, or maybe one has gone through an abortion, where they might be able to find more information about you, or perhaps maybe you just have a word for them that you'd like to share with us?
You can Google Cynthia Wenz, Healed for Life, A Story of Redemption. You'll see it on Lucid. You'll see it on Amazon. You'll find me on Facebook. I am happy to start that conversation with you. On page 105 in my book is my phone number.
Wow.
I'm getting calls from Hawaii. It's amazing. And I get to have that first 7 minutes with that person and just help plug them in. But I would say, don't stay in the dark. Those that are healed can speak freely and candidly. And I say, be a voice.
Yeah. And to marvelous light, we are all running, and we all have a God that is gracious to us and that desperately wants us. And so a reminder that, yes, shame says that I am wrong. Guilt says that I've done wrong, but the gospel says that I've been made right because of what Jesus has done. And there is no sin, including abortion, that is too far, that makes you too far gone. So, Cynthia, thank you so much for being in studio with us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nick.
No, it's just Nick. It's just Nick.
I like the doctor part. I'm so proud.
And so you can catch Cynthia at the Council for Life event. You can find out more information on that event at our website, pointofview.net. And we are coming to the end as well. And so thank you so much for listening in for some of your phone calls. And then also on facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You can make your way over there to be able to find out the archived version of this broadcast. If you missed out on some of the parts of that, you can go back there and find it. Or you can also like the page and see some updates as well. Kirby Anderson will be in the chair later on this afternoon to kind of talk more about on Sanctity of Life on this Sanctity of Life Day we're celebrating here in the U.S. And so thank you so much for joining us. We are so privileged that you have decided to join us. And personally, for me, I'll see you back here on Wednesday for the Millennial Roundtable, and we'll be talking about some issues. But then be sure to check in this afternoon when you've got Kirby Anderson. So thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance?